Thanks everyone. Thank you again for joining this workshop. So I am Chen Zhuo. You may call me Zhuo. I'm a PhD candidate in communications and new media at NUS. So I will be the moderator for the research panel. So for myself, I'm also doing research on how ICT reshapes various collective efforts, such as like civic engagement and collective action. So I'm super excited to have the opportunity to discuss with everyone here. But I think even if some of us were not doing research in this field, I think we might still keep thinking of questions like how we can utilize ICT for tackling challenges in our society, right? Because ICT nowadays is so prevalent that we can barely not talk about it. So I really look forward to this research panel. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. So today we are gonna have 4 speakers to share their thoughts about ICT for good in different areas or fields with us. So each speaker will talk for about 15 minutes. And after all the 4 speeches are done, and we will have a Q&A section, or I would rather call it conversation section, where each of us can discuss with our guests. So let us welcome our first speaker, Dr. Jiaying Li. So let me introduce Jiaying first. So Dr. Jiaying Li is a lecturer at the Sydney School of Education and Social Work. Oh, sorry, Jiaying, are you start sharing your? All right, so let me finish the introduction. Sorry. All right, so Jiaying's key research interest is in citizenship education. In particular, she is interested in understanding the citizenship curricula of schools, focusing on the preparatory processes of citizenship. Having taught in the primary schools in both Australia and Singapore across diverse contexts and in different leadership roles, Ying has developed a keen interest in understanding the sociology of education. She is very interested in understanding the influences of education, including the social, economic, and political factors that shape the curricula and pedagogies of teachers. Her current research interest is in multicultural citizenship and digital citizenship. All right, Jiaying, please.
Hi, thanks, Chen Zhuo. I will share my screen. Okay, right. So, good morning, everyone. I am Jiaying, and I'm a lecturer at the University of Sydney. So as Chen Zhuo has introduced me, so I'm from the School of Education and Social Work at University of Sydney, and I'm interested, my research area is in citizenship education. So today the title of my presentation will be on rethinking civic education in the digital era, using Singapore as a case and as a context to examine the potential of social media in helping students to learn about engagement, civic engagement in particular. So before I start, I thought I'll just spend a bit of time to give you the context of this project, just so that you can better appreciate, what we're trying to find out in this project. So this presentation is based off a larger project, which is called the Mediation of Civic Learning by Digital Social Media. And we actually, at the end, we hope to be able to do a Singaporean, Australian comparison. So like I have said, I'm from FAS at the University of Sydney, the School of Education and Social Work. So main part of my work deals with helping pre-service teachers to have that competencies to, go and work at schools. But we are also working with Wei Yi at NUS, who is working at the Department of Communications and New Media. So because of our combination of expertise, before I start, I thought I will make the distinction between education and schooling. So like I said, although part of my job is really to work with pre-service teachers to prepare them for working in school, this idea of schooling is pretty much confined within the learning space of schools, whereas education is a much broader concept which can take place across many, many different learning spaces, such as social media. So in this presentation, I will be using the word education more than schooling, because I'm taking a broader view of education. Yeah, so to underpin, my discussion about education, I'd just like to perhaps acknowledge the fact here that education is never a neutral process. In other words, it is always value laden, and it always represents something that is valuable, and we do things or we carry out education in a certain way to achieve certain purposes. So what is the implication for education, for civic engagement then? I guess, literature on civic learning and civic engagement has consistently talked about these two key concepts. The first one is the dynamism that is inherent in our society, which should ideally be reflected in education. And the second thing is that it is, this idea of transformation is more or less sort of expected, that education will transform when societies transform. So I guess the key question here will be transform in what directions? Like I said, taking a broad view of education, we see that civic spaces extends beyond the school. In various parts of the society. School is one civic learning space. Social media is one civic learning space. There could be other learning spaces, such as social interactions, such as through different media outlets, and such as students or youth participation in different interest groups. So I guess when we talk about education, we have to come back to the key question. When we say transform, when we say that education is going to be dynamic, we have to perhaps have a clear understanding of what the goals are. So in this case, like when Ben said in the earlier, he views the importance of people having to give back to the society. There are also many ways of giving back to the society. So I guess it is that the appreciation of the complexity of what education do that makes our research interesting. So here I would like to draw on Biesta's work that looks at the three key dimensions of the purpose of education. I won't go into detail, but just very briefly talk about this idea of the complexities of education. When we say volunteering, we can volunteer for many purposes. When we say giving back to the society, there are many ways of giving back to the society. So the first purpose, the first dimension of looking at education is this idea that education serves the purpose of qualification, which is very, very utilitarian, to get students to have the competencies to do something. It could be voting, to be able to work in the society, to contribute to the economy. The second one is socialization. We all have social norms. In all societies, there will be social norms. So it's about equipping students with the competencies to be able to participate in that established norms. The third one is actually the most controversial, because it requires the preparation of youth or young people to sort of question the status quo, and also to move out of that comfort zone, or to challenge what is existing. And that requires actually critical thought and the ability to examine the root causes of social issues. And it could be even challenging the concept of what equity is about, or what social justice is about. So yeah, I guess subjectification is the one that is most controversial, most debated, and most resisted. Yeah. So I guess in this study, as I present the results shortly, it is important to make our conceptualization of civic education very clear, because like I said, there are different purposes when we say volunteering, when we say civic engagement. there are many, many different types. So in this paper, we conceptualize civic education as having to shift from a focus of qualification and socialization to something that is more, that serves more of the purpose of subjectification, where students will be able to appreciate diversity, which is an inevitable phenomenon in all societies now, with globalization and technological advancement. And that we see social media as a learning space for citizens or for individuals to engage with knowledge and information, and then to help them with informed decision-making about how they would like to participate in the society. So I guess the key thing that I'd like to emphasize here is engagement. It's not just passive taking in of knowledge, but to engage and use that knowledge to consider their roles in the society. So I just guess I will, in this presentation, I aim to answer one key question. What are Singaporean youth perspectives of civic-mindedness in the digital era within the context of Singapore, which is non-Western? What are some of the opportunities and what are some of the challenges? So going directly to this question, oops, sorry, okay. Yeah, there is some consensus among the participants about what civic-mindedness means. To them, civic-mindedness means making societies better. And this often means abiding by the rules, abiding by the laws, and abiding by the social norms. And that is considered by them good behavior. So again, I would like to, bring back to what I said earlier. There are different layers, there are nuances to what we understand by making societies better, or this notion of giving back to the society. So among the participants, we see that there are actually diverse views as well about what civic-mindedness means. For example, even though many of them talk about that, civic-mindedness means contributing to the community, to act in the community's interest. There are many, many different interpretations of what it can mean. So for example, there are participants who view that contributing to the community aligns more with the subjectification purpose of education. This means this includes actions like voicing their opinions, keeping political or institutions in general accountable, signing petitions to champion a cause, boycotting or canceling. But at the same time, we've got other participants in this study who says that, such acts of subjectification can institute divide, can infringe on the rights of the minorities, or such actions, actions of subjectification can digress from the social cause in question. So, like I said, subjectification is probably the most controversial and most debated purpose of education. And our participants also have mixed feelings about being civic. The positive feelings associated with civic-mindedness is they're heartened to see that people are championing causes. They see it as something good. They see it as something good in that it helps to move beyond the thinking about self to the society. Well, also, however, there are people who are actually who don't feel as positive about being civic-mindedness. For example, they express feelings of skepticism, feelings of frustration, and they view the diversity of views that are present in the society as leading to pressure and confusion. Yeah, so these are the key findings that we found from the data that we've collected. So going directly to the question now, so what are the opportunities presenting that can present social media as a civic learning space? Now, firstly, we see that the participants do have a basic understanding of civic concepts of, say, agency, diversity, and equity. So this can serve as a shared moral foundation to start supporting civic understanding. Secondly, I guess, although it is not specifically mentioned as politics, I guess the participants also show awareness of politics where, it's not talking about political parties, but this idea that, in social issues, there will be competing interests, there may be, one-sided views, and there may be a discrepancies between reality and the ideal and the pressure that they have as someone in a position to make decision from the society. Yeah, and the third one would be, there are opportunities.
Interrupt.
Is it 50 minutes?
Yeah, no, I mean, could you please wrap up the talk in 5 minutes? So.
Okay, 5 minutes, sure. I will finish. This is the second last slide. Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, great. So yeah, it presents the opportunity for the students to exercise, for youth to exercise agency, because they can see the relationship between participation and social agency. Yeah, and even though they may express negative feelings such as frustration or pressure or skepticism, it also shows that they are concerned about what's happening around them. So these are all good starting points for exercising civic agency. Yeah, so very quickly, the challenges is that the participants show very limited critical thought about civic participation. So I draw connection back to the idea where, they see civic mindedness as adhering to existing laws. So they see the idea of challenging social norms as the possibility of threatening social harmony, which is seen as, superior to actually deliberation. They have quite a constrained view of citizenship, where again, like I said, social harmony, the idea of harmony is superior to, say, disagreement. And I guess it shows the tension between schooling and education, because what we're doing in schools may contradict, what is needed for transformative. I promise this is the last slide. Okay, 3 minutes. Okay, so going back to the question, what is the role that social media can play? Firstly, it is a space for engagement. It can complement or supplement some of the political sort of conservative political climate and schooling practices in Singapore. So provide a space for more critical engagement, and that it also provide a space to consider the diversity of opinions in the society. Yeah, so I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Jiaying. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but as a moderator, I have to do the timekeeping. So in the next speeches, I will remind every speaker when you have like 5 minutes left. All right. So let's continue with the second talk, and we can have more discussion or questions in the conversation section at the end. All right. So our next talk will be given by Dr. Lim Tai Wai. Allow me to introduce Dr. Lim first. So Dr. Lim is a senior research fellow adjunct at National University of Singapore East Asian Institute. He takes an area studies approach to look at Japanese studies topics through a multidisciplinary lens. He is also a historian of modern and contemporary Japan, focusing on post-1868 modern Japanese history, as well as post-Heisei contemporary Japanese issues. All right, Dr. Lim, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Many thanks to Moderator Chen for your kind chairmanship of the session. Many thanks to Prof. Zhang and also Dr. Dong for this kind invitation to be able to share with you guys. Thank you so much. Please allow me to share screen. Today I'll be speaking on the case study of contemporary Japan, particularly in the use of civic tech in Japan, focusing on the case study primarily within the Kanto area in the city of Tokyo. In Japan, civic tech is typically defined as a citizen who is using IT to solve local community problem. So there is a great accent on local community issues, especially challenges. So in terms of mindset, the civic tech practitioners like the NPO, in Japan, they prefer to use the term NPO rather than NGO because there is a sort of tendency for NGOs to collaborate in a positive manner with the authorities. Therefore, they prefer to use non-profit organizations rather than non-governmental organizations. One of these examples is Code for Japan that tries to change the idea that members of the public, when they come across an administrative problem or local community issue, that instead of the local authorities, in fact, residents and citizens can actually take up to find a solution for such a problem. So they are saying basically that there should be more citizenry involvement, and also the citizenry involvement should not have excessive reliance on limited state resources. And those state resources, on the other hand, can be better deployed elsewhere. Therefore, there's a very powerful civil society sort of a tendency when it comes to civic tech practice, and saving public funds is certainly one of the major goals of the civic tech community. So in empowering the local community to save their own, to solve their own challenges, many civic techs are trying to raise civic consciousness, especially in metropolitan cities like Tokyo. This is because many residents are actually migrant workers. They have very shallow roots in the local communities. Now, I've just checked the statistics for Tokyo. In fact, the foreign population of Tokyo is growing 32 times faster than the ability of the local community to replenish themselves due to the aging population. Therefore, the migrant worker population is going to become increasingly important in metropolitan centers like Tokyo. So one civic tech practitioner, Mami Inomoto, says that we have to empower these people, make them care for the place they live in. Otherwise, they'll be apathetic to society problems in the country. So the whole idea is to let them think for themselves and solve the community problems without much reliance on the authorities. In many cases, civic tech initiatives are not just about solving problems per se, but they also want to have demonstrative power in building alternative tech prototypes and solutions to highlight simply that alternative approaches are possible instead of any big governmental approach. So there's a sort of a strong subjectivity to the way they carry out the projects, relying on themselves and on their own resources. Shibata, who is part of the Code for Ibaraki, oversees a 5 civic tech initiative, and he's a good example of how civic tech practitioners want to assist residents in his region with tech solutions as the manager of Civic Tech Cafe, which holds a monthly gathering for civic tech enthusiasts to have dialogues on open data and also civic tech hacking activities, and tries to be more inclusive to pull in members of the community to participate. So civic tech hackathons are often organized by civic techies to come up with prototypes that can refine and tackle social issues. So there's a strong interactivity between all stakeholders within the society, engaging and also interacting with the technical experts who are part of this civic tech community to resolve macro challenges. In fact, because of the activity of the civic tech community, it is starting to move, right? It is starting to gradually move some in the Japanese government who are warming up to civic tech. So the authorities have actually established Japan's first open data portal in December 2013, and it is also an attempt to catch up with other advanced nations which have similar initiatives in this area. So changes in government thinking are also aligned with growing realization of how civic tech can fill in the gap that are left open in technological developments, which were untouched by earlier waves of tech-friendly reforms. So there is a governmental reaction to what is happening in the civil society, particularly in the civic tech community. Others see a potential for even greater consensus. For example, Hiroyuki Seiki, the representative for Code of Japan, says that technical personnel alone, like the engineers, the computer engineers, the coders, the programmers, cannot achieve success on their own without support from sales, designers, promoters, and ordinary citizens and community members. So basically, he hopes that initiatives can be even more inclusive, coming from a variety of background, where you can have a sort of the optimal combination of technical capabilities as well as activists who can create more awareness to the social causes. So it's kind of like a combination of technical software as well as hardware. All these stakeholders can consolidate their skill sets together. This is because many of the contemporary problems that we are facing are multidisciplinary in nature. It cannot be resolved only by technical approach. Therefore, there has to be an ecology of different stakeholders coming together to forge closer bonds. So Civic Hall co-founder, for example, Sifri, argues that civic technologies are needed to lower the bar of entry for the public in order to take part in social activism and policies in all forms, having their voices heard on public issues. So again, there is also an increasing element of social activism in the way that the civic tech community in Japan defines the field. So let's take a look at one of the first case study in this presentation, which is the Code for Japan, the non-profit organization, where Hiroyuki Seiki, the representative, says that his hope and his slogan for the organization is that society can think together and create together. So the organization is mainly regional in nature. So it breaks up into cell-like organization. Each cell is autonomous of each other and tuned into local issues, right? If you look at the map of Japan, it's a very long country, and it ranges from subarctic temperatures to very tropical temperatures in Okinawa. The makeup are also very different. People in Kanto have a very different culture from people in Kansai. Some of them speak completely different dialect language in Kagoshima. So you need to have a lot of localization of the civic tech solutions when it comes to sort of trying to tune into the local issues. And this is where the cell organizations will come in useful. Now, these cell organizations then will come together in the annual Code for Japan Summit, where local brigades from all over Japan will come together for sharing, especially with their specific issues from each region within Japan. So this helps to connect communities with governments. Many of these cells are volunteers. The operators are volunteers with a very few handful of full-time employees. And so there's also limited resources. Therefore, it helps to work with the local government in this sense, and to work with the local government to set up media platforms that can disseminate useful neighborhood and regional information for local residents. So there's a lot of sort of a leeway for collaboration with local authorities. Some of them, for example, Russell and Joe, they were managing different civic technological communities in Tokyo, and they came together jointly code a simple and easy to understand tracker of the COVID-19 cases in Japan. So you can also see that there is a trend that every time there is a disaster or a crisis in Japan, there is opportunity and potential for the civic tech community to come in to help with and supplement government services. Now, the key word is supplement. They do not intend to take over services that government departments, particularly local branches of government departments, are doing, because Japan does have a rather efficient as well as respected authorities and bureaucracy when it comes to whether it comes to local authorities or national governments. But there are rooms for improvement, and it is the room for improvement that's where the Civic Tech finds its niche to come in. Another disaster in which the Civic Tech community was able to sort of raise its profile and increase its, the public awareness of its existence was none other than the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake, which was the triple disasters of earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear reactor meltdown. In both cases, whether it's COVID-19 or the Great East Japan earthquake, the Civic Tech community had a very important role to disseminate information, open access information, to provide accurate information to everyone. So Namie town was a good example in the Great East Japan earthquake, when much of the town was sealed off due to the disaster, and many evacuated residents were not privy to what was happening in their hometown in Namie. And this is where the Civic Tech community came in, and they started the app Namie Newspaper, which is a de facto town newspaper that digitizes and communicate news to the masses via a social media. It's a very simple concept, but yet eminently popular amongst the townsfolk in order to understand what is truly happening in their town that has been struck by triple disasters of tsunami, earthquake, and nuclear meltdown. In the same way, the Fukushima nuclear meltdown was one such example in which Civic Tech community came in to be able to provide information to the townsfolk. And in addition to that, because of the scale of the disaster, central and local governments, as well as the Tokyo Electric Power Company that runs the Fukushima nuclear reactor, were also voluntarily providing open access information, including vertical and oblique area photographs, to the Civic Tech community and the public, allowing the Civic Tech community to curate data and information sources for anyone to use. So there is also, again, collaboration in the crisis, as one stereotypical saying would go, that crisis in the Japanese language, which uses a Chinese character, is made up of both opportunity and danger in the same word. And indeed, the Civic Tech is trying to look at the opportunity that's presented to make society a better place in the post-disaster scenario. So open data initiatives makes machine readable data for secondary use. So basically, they are an information processor that takes the raw data that has been released by local governments after the disaster, and then process it so that it is easily accessible by members of the public. Another example is Code for Sapporo's collaboration with the Hokkaido government that looks at a very simple challenge, which is bear spotting. Right, Hokkaido is a very vast land, and there's a tendency for bears to appear in urban settings. This is because of urbanization, humankind's habitat are getting closer and closer to the wild habitats in which the bears are found in, and therefore the bears have emerged in urban areas. And Civic Tech community sees this as an opportunity to work with the local community to curate and also disseminate information about bear spotting. Now, in Japan, many of the civic techies are not interested in commercially successful applications like blockchains or Industry 4.0 technological breakthroughs. In fact, some of them may even consider these commercialized or commodified aspects of technology to be crass, right? And they are much more socially conscious and not necessarily driven by profit making. Another example in Western Japan this time, in Kanazawa, is the 5374.jp, the NPO. Yes, Chairman Chen?
Thank you.
Yes?
I mean, 3 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. Ending soon, thank you. So because of the sort of very unique way of garbage collection in Japan, everything is recycled. So for example, if you throw away a pen, you have to unscrew the metal part of the pen, separate it from the plastic part, separate it from the ink part in order to dispose of it, right? So many foreigners as well as out-of-towners may not be sort of used to this kind of highly separated trash for recycling, and therefore they create the 5374 app in order to ensure that members of the community, both foreigners, out-of-towners, as well as locals included, that they know how the trash is separated and when each collection is taking place. Because in Japan, they collect trash at different days for different kinds of trash, whether it's plastic, organic, metal, etc. Another example, which is truly a national project, is the Code for Japan's project for monitoring and mitigating COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. And in this project, the Civic Techies work together with the Tokyo Metropolitan Government. And what is special about this project is national in scope. So again, the very familiar sort of a practice or trend whereby disasters gives the opportunity for techies to come in to help create solutions in the process, also alleviating the problem and also increasing the profile of civic techies. What is also interesting is that in this case, the civic techies actually came up with the solution first to monitor and also to provide information about COVID-19 infections. And despite the fact that they came up with this software first, they voluntarily became secondary to the release of a state-backed application so that they become a supplement to the main application. There's no clash between them, and they made it so because the overarching aim is for a solution that can benefit society as a whole. Same case for the Idea Box, where they have created apps in which people can provide feedback, people from the public can provide feedback to the app in order to exchange information freely. The Contact Confirmation app is also another example in which proximity of infected individuals is provided on screen for people to use. So in this sense, I think what COVID-19 has released or unleashed is a good working relationship between the NPOs, particularly civic tech communities, and the state agencies. And in fact, one of them was even given an award by the Cabinet Office in providing such social services. And this kind of working relationship appears to have good implications for future work to come. Perhaps this time they can collaborate more before the disaster and maintain and sustain the working relationship. With that, I've ended my presentation. Thank you, panel chair, and thank you everyone for your kind attention. I'll sign off here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ying Taiwan. It's very informative and eye-opening to me because personally, I'm very interested in the Japanese society. So I hope I could have opportunity to discuss with you more. So let's continue with our third speech. So our third speaker is Dr. Dongtao. Dr. Dongtao is research fellow at the East Asian Institute at NUS. He received his PhD in sociology from Stanford University and conducts research in the field of political sociology, especially on state-society relations and nationalism in Taiwan and mainland China. His paper has been published by international peer-reviewed journals such as China Quarterly, Journal of Contemporary China, China and International Journal Issues and Studies, sponsored by the China-US Scholars Program. He's doing research on US-China confrontation over Taiwan and the South China Sea at the 21st Century China Center, University of California at San Diego from September 2021 to May 2022 as a visiting scholar. All right, so Dr. Dongtao, please.
Thank you, Chair. Let me share my PPT. All right. Thanks again for inviting me to give this talk. I'm a Taiwan specialist, and but this topic is totally new for me. But I'm very interested in this topic about the civic technology development in Taiwan. This is a very preliminary study, and in this study, I asked the question whether the civic tech development model in Taiwan has been shifting from a society-driven to government and society co-driven model. So my preliminary answer is yes, and I'll show you some evidence for this model shift. All right, first let's see some highlights of Taiwan civic tech development. Let's start with the Gov0, and I think many of you have known it. It was established in 2012 in Taiwan. It is the largest civic tech community in Taiwan, also one of the largest civic tech community in the world, at least on the GitHub. From this, some statistics about the Gov0, you can see that they have organized 4 international summits. They have organized 46 hackathons, and also they have been doing 757 projects. So it's quite a fruitful organization. And also from here, we can see that this is the statistics from the GitHub. You can see that here, the Taiwan's Gov0 is actually quite large, comparable to the to here, the Code for America. Yeah. All right. From the Gov0 and from other civic tech community in Taiwan emerged this very famous, popular civic technologist whose name is Audrey Tang. I think many of you know her. She was born in 1981, so she is still quite young. Now she's the first digital minister of Taiwan. She joined the government in 2016 here, 2016. But before that, she was the leading figure in Taiwan's civic tech development. She was, one of the founders of the Gov0, of V Taiwan, etc., etc. So she's the key person. And before 2016, she was the leading person at the society level to promote the development of civic technology community. And after 2016, after she joined the government, she was working in the government, promoting the government connection with the society, especially with the civic tech community, to promote the civic tech development. So I see that her joining the government as a key milestone event, which indicate a kind of the shifting of the development model from society-driven to government and society-driven. So this is the last highlight. This last highlight shows that after she joined the government, she actually did many things to help the government connect with the civic tech community and to help promote the open government project. One of her major achievements is that she leads a team within the government and within the government, and also with the societies, NGOs, civic tech communities, to draft this first open government national action plan. This action plan has been officially released, and you can see that there are 19 commitments in 5 areas in this plan, such as promoting open data and information transparency, expanding public participation in the public policy, etc., etc. So this is one of her major achievement within the government, connecting the society, evolving many major civic tech technologies in Taiwan to make this plan, which is a strong indication of the government and society co-driven growth of the civic tech community. Also, under her coordination, Taiwanese government has had this very effective management of the COVID-19 crisis with the society. At least some examples, such as MaskNet applications, first created by a civic technologist. Then Audrey Tang opened the government data to him and to other civic technology communities. Then a lot of civic technologists created many similar MaskNet apps and uploaded them onto the government website. Then Taiwanese people just can easily get the mask from the grocery stores, from pharmacies, it helps the Taiwan's management of COVID-19 greatly, and there's several other examples. Okay, from these three highlights, I hope you can have the impression that the Taiwan's civic technology development is shifting from a society-driven model to a government and society-driven model. Okay, let me explain this process in more details. I first divided the whole process into three periods. The first period is from 1980s to 2012. That's before the government zero was established. And the second period is 4 years between 2012 to 2016. That's after Gov Zero was established, but before Audrey Tang joined the government. Then finally, it's after 2016, that's since Audrey Tang joined the government. So this, for the first two stages, it's basically society-driven model. For the third stage, since 2016, I think it's an emergence of the government and the society co-driven model. And to observe this process, I use a political process theory, which is a mainstream theory in the social movement literature, to explain and to observe the emergence, the growth, and the development and the decline of the social movement. So basically, this theory provides three sets of factors to help us to observe the social movement development. And in Taiwan, the civic tech development is at its early stage, is just like social movement development. So I use this political process theory to observe it. First, this theory proposed the contextual factors. Usually calls political opportunity. That is what kind of opportunities that the government provided for the civic tech community to grow. The second is the relational factors, including the mobilization through organizations, networks, or other channels. Basically, it's an organization issue or the recruitment issue, how the social movement organization, how the civic tech community recruit participants. I will observe, I will explore whether there are more independent and co-mobilization by the civic tech community and the government. And finally, the last factor is the cultural factors. That is the discursive framing to justify and inspire the movement. To have a successful movement, you not only you need to have not only the opportunities, but also the organization and networks and participants, but also finally you need to have the good justification why your movement is important, should be supported. So this is about the cultural factors, discursive framing. I will explore whether there are better collaboration in framing and a deeper convergence of discourse between the civic tech communities and governments in Taiwan. All right, very quickly, for the first stage, the context is quite actually complex because the Taiwan in the first stage before 2012 has been experiencing rapid political, economic, social transition. I don't have time to talk about this transition in detail, but I just want to briefly indicate that this transition could be analyzed from several aspects. First is the political aspect. That is the Taiwan has been experiencing democratization and democratic consolidation, such as in 1986, the first opposition party was established. That was DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party. In 1996, Taiwan had its first popular presidential election, and in 2000, Taiwan had the first regime change from KMT, the old one-party rule, to the DPP, this new opposition party. And then in 2008, there's another regime change from the DPP to the KMT. That is KMT returned to power. So politically speaking, this is a very unstable period because of the democratization and the democratic consolidation. But interestingly, during this period, almost all the aspects of the Taiwan's governance has been improving, except for the political stability. This is according to the World Bank's governance indicator. You can see the indicator shows very clearly that Taiwan's governance level improved constantly, except for its political stability. This is the first very important context. The second is about economy. Taiwan's economy, after miracle kind of economic miracles for 3 decades, it went into this post-development period with a lot of social issues, which is common for many developed world. Many social issues, pollution, the social welfare issues, social justice issues, and then also along these issues, along with the democratization, there is a rising civil society, internet, and digital society in Taiwan. And this society, the Taiwanese society, is very resistant. It's very resisting against the government, against the establishment. This is the context from the society level. And finally, the context about the government opportunity, the government, under the pressure of the society resistance and protest, the government has been trying to open itself to the society, trying to adopt more social opinions in their governance. For example, they established e-government program, and they required citizen participation in their administrative procedure law, and they also passed the freedom of government information law, which is very helpful for the civic technology development in Taiwan. Okay, after the context, after you understand the context, you probably want to understand the organizations and mobilization of civic technology in Taiwan during that period of time. During that period of time, the open source communities have kind of gone into the Taiwanese society, like first in 1995, and they also have this Yahoo Open Hack Day, first in 2008. This shows that before the establishment of Gov0, there already have a lot of networks of civic technologies, or we can call it hacker networks. So what about the framing? Framing, because of this civic tech communities learn from the Western mature democracies about the hackers' skills, cultures, and the hacker culture is very democratized, is very pro-democracy, pro-freedom. So actually, within Taiwan's civic tech communities, it's just like a democracy forerunners in Taiwan. All right, this is the first stage. The second stage, which is the most, I think, is most important stage
Sorry.
for the civic.
Sorry
Yes.
to interrupt. Can you wrap up in 3 minutes?
In 3 minutes.
Yes.
All right. Okay. For the second stage is that the context is that the rising user resistance against the KMT government, and the civic tech communities join this youth resistance against the KMT government with the technology support to those protests. Organization is that the established of the Gov0 in 2012, and also the establishing of the Open Culture Foundation 2 years later, and they have a bi-monthly hackathon. And there are a lot of independent projects done by the civic tech communities, and also some collaboration between the government and the civic tech community in Taiwan. And the framing, this is interesting part, because during this time, we see the emerging new civic technologies identity with Taiwanese characteristics. This doctor, MC Li, wrote his whole dissertation on this civic technologies identity. She is an anthropologist. Her dissertation that described the civic technology identity in Taiwan as a noble day culture. I don't have time to explain that, but it's very interesting. It's very unique for Taiwan. And also, very gradually, Taiwan's discourse on civic tech has started shifting from open source at society level to open government at the government level. And the KMT government also did a lot of work to improve the Taiwanese government's openness. For example, their ranking in the global open data in 2013 ranking is only 36. Then 2 years later, their ranking is #1 in the world. So they have done a lot of work. All right, but still the Open Culture Foundation's Open Government report still criticize the KMT government's open government projects a lot. All right, and finally, the last stage, the context is that after DPP took power, there is improved social and political stability, and then the pandemic. So basically, on the organization and mobilization side, a main event, as Taiwan has presented about the Taiwan case. In Taiwan, is very similarly the case that civic technology communities work with the government closely to manage manage the pandemic very well. And because the Audrey Tang joined the government, because her introduction of this government society co-driven model to the world, to the international media, Taiwan's international publicity has been rising. Of course, its publicity, international publicity's rise also due to other factors, but Audrey Tang's introduction, Audrey Tang's presentation about the Taiwan case are really a big contributor to the rising international publicity of Taiwan. The framing is that even the digital democracy of Taiwan started contributing to Taiwan's national identity in the international community against another kind of negative example of China's authoritarian, digital authoritarianism. So, okay, I don't have time to explain this in more details. But okay, finally, some theoretical policy-related reflections on adaptability. My observation of the Taiwanese case is that, I think civic tech communities in Taiwan, also in other countries, in different contexts, has this relatively higher adaptability than other social movement organizations or social movement sectors, actually. So this is one of the major reasons why it thrives in different contexts, in different government-society relations. It could thrive in Taiwan, in Japan, even in China, in a kind of authoritarian country. Okay, but I have other reflections on this Taiwan case, but I don't have time. Okay, that's all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Qi. Thank you so much for your comprehensive sharing. I can see a lot of potential conversations going on between your studies and Dr. Lim's study in terms of, like, for example, civic tech and the change of mode of management in disaster response, etc. So maybe we can talk about more in our final section, in the conversation section. Okay, so let's move on to our final speech. So our final talk will be given by Ms. Gionnieve Lim. Please correct me if I pronounce wrongly. Okay, so Ms. Lim is a PhD candidate at the Singapore University of Technology and Design. Her research area is on the intersection of human-computer interaction with civic tech and misinformation. Her research focuses on the use of interface interventions such as labels, warnings, and visualizations on communication platforms to address misinformation. Her recent work investigates user interactions with various notch interfaces and visualizations in the context of backchecking, seeking to understand how they are perceived by users and what considerations should be made to improve the design. All right, so Ms. Lim, please.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Moderator Chen. So, thanks everyone for having me, and I'm happy to present this research on a review of research, academic research on civic technology. So I will cover just the insights that we have gained in the interest of time, and just a note that this work was supported by the Civic Tech in Asia project. Okay, so the overview of this presentation, I'll first be going through just very briefly on what is civic technology, even though we have already been discussing this throughout the day. Next, I will briefly go through what was the review method we did for our review. And finally, I will discuss the findings and insights that we have gained from our review. So firstly, Civic Tech. Actually, at the very beginning in Wei Yu's keynote address, she presented this video, and the video has already covered very nicely what Civic Tech is. So the definition that we take is also that citizens are the beneficiaries of civic tech. So civic tech is meant to serve citizens, to enhance their capital, as well as to serve the public good. And the goal is to get citizens more involved and more engaged in issues of national interest, to get them more involved in governance, as well as to have them raise their ideas and thoughts so that they can better society. And the technology that is mainly, that is more broadly discussed, is on information and communication technologies. So these techs follows a very broad range of technology and are used in many different ways to serve citizens in the interest of civic goals. Next, I'll be going through the review method. So for this analysis, we focus on academic papers. So our review here would be more focused on the academic rather than industry side. And what we did was we took papers from the ACM, the Association of Computing Machinery Digital Library, to get 224 papers that are relevant to civic tech. And then we conducted coding to identify key aspects of the papers for the review. And now I'll move on to the insights. This the first insight here is on the trends of civic tech publications. So the first paper that we noted was a paper on community information systems that was published in 2001. And following from there, you see in this graph that there is an exponential increase over the next 20 years regarding the academic interest in civic tech. And if you look at the venues to the right, there are 5 venues that are listed here. These are the top 5 venues out of a total of 62 venues that we looked at. And the top contributor is CHI, which is the Conference on Human Factors in Computing, which had a total of 54 papers that were published over the years, followed by CSCW, which had 41. And then the rest had about 10 papers each. So we can see that CHI and CSCW, CSCW is the Conference on Computer-Supported Collaborative Work. So these 2 conferences factor for the major contribution in civic tech and computing particularly. And then there are this blue graph here is on others, which feature the remaining 57 venues, and each venue has averaged about 1.65 papers per venue. And next, we go through the civic issues of the papers. So very, like what's most striking in this graph is a huge part of the pie that's attributed to democracy and participation. So a lot of papers are interested in the ways that civic tech can help to push forward governance, particularly democracy in areas like deliberative democracy, how it can be more fair and transparent and just, as well as in participation. So for example, how citizens can engage in various participatory processes to better communicate with the government and to push forward civic goals. And this, I think, what Dr. T has mentioned is very, Taiwan has been a good example of civic interest in democracy and participation. And then we also have the next 9 other sub-issues that each take a bit lesser part of the pie, but they are also equally important. So for example, public service and governance, news and journalism, urban planning, neighborhood local issues, education, as Dr. Neoh was discussing in the first speech, and then accessibility and minority, sustainability, environment, crime and safety, and disaster, which also reminds me of the example of the earthquakes in Japan that Dr. Lim mentioned. So yeah, the civic issues are very broad and they cover a lot of different aspects and a lot of different topics. Essentially, I mean, my personal view is that it covers anything under the sun, which it truly does. So it's a very interesting and very expensive, area where people can look into, and there are a lot of opportunities here to foster more civic interest. So the next insight is on the location where these studies are conducted. So rather unsurprisingly, USA, Europe, UK, they take a huge, more than 3/4 of the pie. And this phenomenon is not just limited to civic tech. I think it's pretty much in all research, in all fields of research, we see this phenomena. And I think because in this talk, we are interested in ICT4Good in Asia, right? And if you look here, there's only 9% of all papers that covers Asia. That's only about 20 papers. Yep, if my math is right. Yeah, so that's actually not a lot. And we can already see from the examples in the previous speeches that there are so many activities going on in civic technology, and it has been happening for decades. It's not just a recent phenomenon. I mean, now developing countries are gradually being more capable technologically to implement civic technologies, but there are still so many examples out there that has been being developed over the years. And so over here, I mean, what this shows is that academics, at least since research papers are largely written by academics, right? I guess the academics could perhaps take greater interest, especially those who are in Asia, you know, to take interest in this field and to try to advance the knowledge of civic tech in Asia, because especially when we start to think about the cultural differences in like, for example, collectivism in Asia versus the more individualistic US. Yeah, so these differences would definitely play out different participatory processes, for example, and different ways of collective action in the different Western East-West counterparts. And the next one is on the types of civic tech itself. So if you look here, the majority is on websites and web apps. So web platforms are the main ways, the main civic technologies that have been used and created by people, as particularly those who collect, particularly for tailor-made civic tech, so civic tech that are custom created for various purposes. And then the next one is social media and forums. So this one is actually rather interesting because in the field itself, there is always this argument between whether social media is considered a civic tech. So there is this argument in academia on this. And at least for our side, what we consider is that social media does foster participatory discussions and processes on democracy as well as civic issues. So in a sense, it is, even though it was not created for the purpose of civic as a civic tech, but it does facilitate civic purposes and civic goals. And given that there are 51 papers discussing this, it actually makes for quite a significant amount as well. And the next sets are mobile apps. So these are phone apps, particularly for those that are interested in, say, urban planning, where mobility. So these apps would include, an example of such an app is this Cycle Atlanta app, where cyclists, they install the app on their phone and they go around mapping the routes that they take to cycle around Atlanta. And then this helps other people who are interested in finding routes that are for cycling, for example, in across the country. And the next one is IoT and public displays. So this one takes mixed use of sensors and, say, temporal public displays where they set up at a certain location, maybe they exhibit for a few weeks to a few months and then they take it down. And then there's just this more slightly different way of engagement, because in the prior ones, it's all on the digital space, but here you have it in the physical space where, say, you have this display, and then in the central, for example, and people who walk past, they can just interact with the boards that are on display. They can see what is for example, a display on, there's this paper on megaphones where they set up a mic in the stage, and anyone can go there and talk about whatever issue they want. So it's just more of like this open and sort of distinct collaborative action where people can come and talk and then discuss in a very open way without any huge intervention or like formality and rigidity to it. And the last one is works on algorithms. So these are on the minority and discuss papers on, say, machine learning algorithms to improve, say, biases in algorithms, or just the efficiency and the efficacy of the algorithms. And the next one is on the funders and partners. So very strikingly from this graph, you can see that government has the largest part of the graph. And one of the reasons is because we are focused on academic papers. So a huge amount of the bar is actually attributed to government grants in research. So over here, the grants has attributed to this distinct amount of bars. But then if we look across the remaining ones, funding by, say, foundations, universities, companies, organizations, they are much more limited in this case. And if we look at the partners, for example, organizations and networks partners the most with universities and governments. So these partners, what we mean is that they are the ones who provide non-monetary resources. So perhaps they provide the location, or they provide the data, or even the technology or the people to help to create civic tech. And well, mainly the point here is just that for supporting civic tech initiatives, we can't like support across the board is necessary, because each of them can offer different insights, different resources into civic tech development. And if we just want to rely on, like currently a lot of civic tech, because civic tech is on social good, so it's not exactly a profit-driven initiative. So that's why most of the funding would also come from the government. But yeah, if more organizations and a diverse set of stakeholders can offer resources, then it would surely propel civic tech development.
Gionnieve, I'm sorry to interrupt. There are 5 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next, the 6th insight is on the designers and the users in civic tech projects. So you can see that there's a huge, there's a main large division in the 2 camps of groups. So the blue ones refer to designers and the orange refer to users. And designers are largely academics, companies, and governments. These groups have the resources, they have knowledge, and they have the resources to push forward civic tech development. And for the users, they are largely organizations and general citizens and specific citizens. So this also makes sense because civic tech is meant to serve citizens in the first place. Like citizens are the beneficiaries of civic tech. But maybe I would just go through a bit more in detail about what we mean by specific citizens. So these are, okay, so the distinction between general citizens and specific citizens is that for civic tech targeting general citizens, it's more broad. So for example, say a platform for election, and then for an election, you are concerned with all citizens. So in this case, this would fall under general citizens. But then if say your civic tech is meant to serve a more focused purpose, you know, for example, civic tech, the cycling for Atlanta that I mentioned previously. So it's more focused on people who are cyclists, for example. So these would refer to specific citizens. So various other entities like activists or volunteers, even professional groups. So your electronic health record for hospital staff. So this is the distinction between general citizens and specific citizens. And the last part here is on the civic tech design and participant mechanisms. So we know that citizens are the beneficiaries, but then if we look at the design, the people who are designing them are the academics, governments, companies, and yet the people who are using them are the citizens. So over here, there is actually an opportunity for there to be a stronger co-design process between both the designers as well as the users, because the users know what they want, the users know what they need. And the users, they are not just, I mean, a lot of traditional software development is not spoon feeding, right? You understand what the users want, and then you develop the technology, what the user needs, and then you develop the technology based on that, and then you give it to them, hoping that it will work out. But then in this case, what the users themselves, they are also very capable in providing the insights as well as their personal expertise and experiences in how to better formulate and design civic tech. So there can actually be stronger collaboration between both users and designers. So if we look at this list of design processes here, the one that has the most is participatory design, which talks about how users are actively involved throughout the formulation of civic tech. So from its inception to its creation, development, testing, evaluation. So throughout, users are always involved, they are discussed, they even work together to create the technology. And that's the, the opportunity here for users to take a greater stage. So to shift, say, the right side, the orange part of the pie, and balance it across so that we even have more general citizens working as designers. And so with this, actually, I have come to the end of this presentation, and I hope that I was able to give a good review of the academic state of civic tech research. And I'll just end off with a summary, which also briefly discusses the various insights that I have shared. So at the start, I discussed, that academic research in civic tech has grown exponentially and is largely interested in democracy and participation. And given this workshop, there is so much opportunity for research in the global south and Asia to be further pushed, particularly since there's so much going on, but these are not being captured, at least on the academic side, not as much as the US or the UK. And there are a lot of variety of technologies supporting civic interest. So the ICTs, the ICTs can include social media, web app, mobile apps, as well as IoTs and public displays, which are lesser, not as much used by most people, but then these are also very valid and very innovative forms of technology that can help to push forward civic interest. And so for the funding and the partnerships, we definitely need more support across the board, especially since everybody can provide various expertise, insights, as well as resources that can contribute in a lot of different ways in civic tech. And finally, I'll put the discussion of both the designer and users, as well as the design and participant mechanisms together, which is that end users can be more greatly involved in the design of civic tech. So if we can get more people involved in the design, not just in the usage, but the design, then we can design civic tech that is more considerate of the values of, say, the citizens, that the citizens can also participate more actively and be more involved and engaged in the development of civic tech. So thank you.
Thank you, Gionnieve. It's really a nice overview. It's not that surprising to see that Europe, UK, and the US accounted for over like 70% of the research, right? But I would like to say that's also our opportunity, for Asian research. And that's also the meaning for today's workshop. All right. So thanks again to all of our four speakers, very illuminating speeches. And also I would like to thank the audiences, the participants who stayed with us. So I guess you have a lot to ask or to discuss. So please feel free to raise your questions or your discussion in the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself if you would like to do so. Yeah, please feel free. All right, so any questions? Yes.
Chair, if I may, can I ask a question to Ying?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Ying, you had a very interesting, very good presentation about the civic mindedness. Yeah, civic mindedness. Are you surprised to find that in Singapore, subjectification is not an emphasis in terms of civic education? Because I lived in Singapore for over 10 years. I feel the Singapore's culture does not encourage subjectification, does not encourage critical thinking, independent thinking. So actually, I'm not surprised. But so from your study, to what extent the Singapore's education system, especially Singapore's MOE, accept the idea that the civic mindedness is mainly about subjectification, not about socialization? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. I guess first of all, before I comment on your question, can I just say that there are very diverse views about what Singapore education is doing, and perhaps even if you ask different educators, they might tell you different things. For example, if you speak to someone who is in charge of citizenship education at the Ministry of Education, they probably tell you that there is a lot of critical thinking that is being discussed. So I guess I come from a point where I use, for example, the purpose of education as a framework to justify my analysis. And to answer your question, I think the idea that Singapore education has been very much focused on qualification and socialization, and less of subjectification is nothing very new, to be honest. It has been widely debated and widely sort of highlighted in literature on civic education in school. So talking about schooling, civic education. So yeah, I guess it's not surprising. It has been widely critiqued in in the field of education. So yeah, and especially the political climate, and that our Singapore education is directed by a survival ideology, where the need to survive comes before maybe dissentiment or disagreement, is something that has been actually observed by many scholars. Yeah.
Thank you, Ying, and thank you, Dr. Chi, for your question. So I got a question in the chat box. That's from Genki Uno, right? So the question is, I think civic tech is important to establish democratic society. On the other hand, many Southeast Asian countries will develop future city in bureaucratic perspectives. So what is the major obstacle in Southeast Asian countries? So so who would you like to ask this question to? Do you or any hello Uno? Or if our guests, if any of you like to address this.
Maybe I can share some of my thoughts. Because in my study of Taiwan case, actually, I found that Taiwanese civic tech communities has a very high adaptability, and I guess actually this is not unique for Taiwan. It's kind of universal for any civic tech communities in any country. Generally, the civic tech communities has a high adaptability, so which is an advantage for this community to develop under any government society relations. Because one of the reasons, because of the pragmatism, or the hands-on imperatives of the hacker culture. Yeah, they just want to solve problems, just want to provide technological support. They do not pursue any major debates or major issue. Not like social movement. They're not very confrontational. They're not very, always against the government. I think this is very good nature of civic technology that making them more adaptable to any context. So from this perspective, actually, I think as long as the government can give them space, give them more space, and support them with more policies and some resources, and even like the last presenter talk about the funding. As long as you give them opportunities, give them policy space, they will grow very rapidly. So I guess for any country, civic technology and its community means opportunity. More opportunity than challenges to the government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chi. So yeah, we got more questions. So let me just read through them. So yeah, we got a question from Wei Yu. So the question is, other than the community of civic technologies, how can citizens be engaged other than just being treated as users? Yeah, this is also my question. Yeah. So any
sorry, I guess I just something that I thought about quite a lot, so I'll just comment. I think with regards, it was when I was listening to the presentation, I recall in the news here in Australia just a few months back, 3 teenage boys actually saw that there was so many misinformation about COVID, and they actually got together. They saw a need. They got together and created an app where people, the citizens, can cross-reference information about COVID. And I thought that was really brilliant. And from an educator point of view, or from the education perspective, we have to start looking at our students not just as students, but really looking and respecting them as citizens. which I think in many societies, this idea of seeing our students as citizens, as having autonomy, is still not widely accepted, I think, across Western and Asian countries, at least in Singapore and Australia. This has been a tension. So I think until we are ready to see them as autonomous being, we will continue to treat them as an object rather than a subject. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Thank you, Ying. So we have another question from Ozan. So Ozan's question is, he wonders, what do you think about the historic trends on the role of government in civic tech? For example, Gionnieve showed that a substantive part of funding comes from governments, right? I mean, that's really a big question, right? So do we have time-wise trends on the fundings too? The Dr. Chi also showed political historical account in Taiwan. So I wonder if the role of government changed similarly in Singapore, Australia, and other countries. Thank you, Ozan, for the good question.
So maybe I'll just offer a bit of my insight personally on this. So what I feel that the government can support mostly is essentially with any initiative that is pushed by the government, usually most focus will be placed on it, and then we will see greater development on it. So the role of the government is definitely very important in either say like in Taiwan, giving the legislative laws to support the development of civic tech, or say in other academic side, providing grants to further the research in civic tech, because when there's research, then we can generate discussion. With discussion, we can generate development, right? So at least from my perspective, if the government is willing to put effort in civic tech, we will see a push in development for it. But then the question then is, will the government be interested in doing this? So at least in Singapore right now, we are staying in the stage of GovTech, right? So the government has put in a lot of national resources in GovTech to push for the development of technologies that will make government processes more efficient. But then GovTech is still slightly different from CivicTech, because GovTech aims to push for governance processing and say like for citizens to be able to go about their civic duties more smoothly, for example, with the safe entry and the trace together token due to COVID-19. But then CivicTech is more about getting citizens to engage in government processes, to provide their insights, to provide their knowledge, expertise, to push for be better engaged in governance, for example. So I think that's just where it's a question of national interest. Like if the government is willing to put in the effort, then we can definitely see a push for it, especially like in the case of Taiwan. And yeah, let's just hope that there will be more people as various cities, countries develop, and they start to go beyond just developing and to start thinking about social interests as well as the good for the people, and then you'll see more. I think that's where the interest will shift towards improving lives, not just for the citizens, but also for the citizens themselves to take out the mental to do so. So that's just my perspective, and maybe the rest can also offer, because this question is a rather broad one.
Thank you, Gionnieve. And I think Dr. Taiwan has something to say.
Okay, many thanks, Chair. I would like to respond to all three questions, but in very short answers in sound bites. For the very first question, I think I would adopt a political science perspective in answering the question. When you talk about bureaucratic societies or even technocratic societies, it depends on whether you're talking about bureaucratic and technocratic societies in authoritarian political systems, or if you're talking about it from a liberal democratic system. So if you are talking about it from an authoritarian system, I think the tendency is for the government to incorporate, merge, or practice some form of corporatism, such that the civic tech community or other civil society communities will eventually be incorporated into government organs, semi-governmental organizations, or functions. But in liberal democratic sort of political systems, especially in systems like Japan, for example, it tends to be a collaboration So they will be incorporated into a government framework or some kind of government outreach that will work with them. So I think in a nutshell, I think that is how things may transpire in response to the first question. In the second question, I think it is easier for societies. Again, this time I'm adopting a sociological point of view. Societies that are collectivist, groupist, and communitarian, they tend to be able to mobilize people for engagement, much more so that societies where the cultural context is a lot more individualistic. So take for example Japan, because of its post-war constitution, it could not lock down the society during the COVID-19 crisis. It could not constitutionally lock down, or it could not do so with great constitutional complications. So the very fact that it managed to sort of survive 5 waves with moderate infections and deaths, its death is around 18,000, infections about 1 million, moderate success. The reason why it could do that is simply because of local community culture and how they self-mobilize themselves, or how they sort of voluntarily kept away from gatherings or going out at certain points of time. So it's very much dependent on this communitarian spirit. Some would even call it, some scholars would even call it the shame culture. For example, Ruth Benedict's book, to avoid shame within the local community if they do something that is different from others. So I think it tends to be stronger in a communitarian, groupist, and a community-based kind of society setup. And finally, the last question about funding. In Japan, I think the government provides a framework for sharing data. It may provide some funding for to invite applications, but in the literature, it reveals that a lot of these civic tech outfits, they actually do part-time work. They very selectively pick some commercial projects. This would give them some form of revenue to keep their operating costs going. And in fact, the literature says that some of these projects became so interesting that commercial companies actually sent their staff members to participate in these projects, not for profit purposes, but for them to pick up new skills and to test their skills outside the typical commercial projects that they are engaged in order to hone their skills. So they do have sort of commercial revenues, but they are careful to select them because after all, as I mentioned in the presentation, a lot of them have this conscious idea that commodification and over-commercialization of civic tech is sort of works against the purpose, the grain of the purpose and objective in the first place. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Lim. So anyone would like to add on or follow up? So if no, it's lunchtime now, although I really enjoy the food for thought, right? So if no, then I think we shall not occupy more time from you. I'm sorry for running over time, but yeah, it's really a fascinating panel. So thank you all for joining this panel, and please join me to thank all of our speakers for their illuminating talk. Thank you.